high in the forgotten mountains of the world, beyond the reach of highways, power lines, and common sense. There are valleys like this one, places so remote that even the maps seem unsure about them. A thin river cuts through the valley floor, winding quietly between ancient stone walls carved by glaciers long before recorded history, and long before humans were supposed to be here. Or at least, modern humans. Because according to a theory whispered in campgrounds, debated in late-night radio shows, and occasionally shouted at documentary filmmakers through megaphones, Neanderthals never disappeared. They simply went underground. Official science tells us that Neanderthals vanished roughly 40,000 years ago, replaced by Homo sapiens as the dominant human species. A quiet extinction. A closed chapter. Case supposedly closed. But some researchers, amateur archaeologists, and one very enthusiastic man we met outside a gas station in northern Montana, believe something very different happened. They believe the Neanderthals did not die out. They retreated downward into the vast cave systems beneath the earth. If true, the implications would be staggering. Across the planet lie millions of miles of unexplored subterranean caverns. Entire underground landscapes exist beneath our feet. Rivers, chambers, tunnels, some large enough to swallow skyscrapers. What if those caves are not empty? What if, thousands of years ago, a species perfectly adapted to harsh climates, immense strength, and communal living, simply moved underground and stayed there? According to the theory, these valleys are not wilderness. They are doorways. Hidden beneath the rock are massive cave networks. And somewhere in those depths, underground cities. Cities built not with steel and glass, but with stone, bone, and something else. Something the conspiracy theorists insist must be involved. Alien technology. The story goes like this. Long ago, visitors from elsewhere arrived on Earth. Why they came, no one can agree. But according to the legend, they encountered two intelligent species competing for the surface. Early humans and Neanderthals. The aliens, it is said, favored the Neanderthals, not for their intelligence, but for their resilience. Stronger bones, greater cold tolerance, a species built for survival. And so, according to the theory, they were given help, guidance, engineering, perhaps even technology. Together they carved out vast subterranean networks beneath mountains like these. Hidden sanctuaries where Neanderthal civilization could survive, unseen, for tens of thousands of years. Which raises a troubling question. If Neanderthals live below, who walks above? That is where Bigfoot enters the story. Because according to believers, Bigfoot are not simply animals. They are scouts, surface travelers, messengers moving between underground cities. Part Neanderthal, part adaptation, perhaps even genetically altered. Tall, hair-covered, intelligent, quiet enough to move through forests unseen, and large enough to leave footprints that make park rangers sigh heavily. During the filming of this documentary, our crew spent several days in valleys like this one. We expected dramatic scenery. We expected cold weather. We expected Carl from sound engineering to complain about the lack of cell reception. What we did not expect was what happened on the second night. At approximately 2:17 a.m., our thermal camera detected a heat signature along the ridge above camp. Large, bipedal, moving quietly along the tree line. When the crew went to investigate, the figure was gone. But something remained. A footprint, roughly 18 inches long, and deep enough to make our cameraman quietly reconsider his career choices. Of course, skeptics point out that large footprints are not proof of underground civilizations. And they are correct. But then again, many of the world's greatest discoveries began with something small. A bone fragment, a footprint, a strange echo in a cave wall. Because if this theory is even partially true, then beneath mountains like these, an entire parallel chapter of human evolution may still be unfolding. Hidden cities, ancient tunnels, a civilization older than recorded history, and somewhere between those worlds, moving silently through valleys like this one, the scouts, watching, listening, and perhaps wondering why a documentary crew with 3 cameras, 2 drones, and a very nervous sound engineer has started asking so many questions. In the next segment, we descend into the caves themselves, where strange tunnels, ancient carvings, and a very questionable decision involving a rope ladder may reveal whether the underground Neanderthal cities are myth or something far more extraordinary. In the wilderness, there are places that seem untouched by time. Still lakes, endless forests, quiet hills where the wind moves through the pines like an old story being whispered from tree to tree. At first glance, this valley appears perfectly ordinary. A peaceful northern lake, ringed by dense evergreen forest, with water so clear that the sky itself seems to sink into its depths. It is the kind of place hikers photograph, the kind of place anglers dream about, and according to some researchers, the kind of place that may be hiding something very unusual beneath its surface. Because in remote regions across the world, strange patterns begin to emerge. Isolated lakes, unusual cave systems, and deep underground tunnels, some stretching for miles beneath the mountains. Many of these cave systems remain largely unexplored, not because scientists lack curiosity, but because exploring them can be extremely dangerous. Cave-ins, flooding, low oxygen, and occasionally, the unnerving feeling that something else might already be down there. During the making of this documentary, our crew arrived at this lake expecting a quiet day of filming. Instead, we discovered something curious. A narrow cave entrance hidden among the rocks along the northern shore. The opening was small, barely large enough for a person to crawl through, which immediately prompted a spirited discussion among the crew about who would volunteer to investigate it. The debate lasted approximately 45 minutes, and ended when our producer reminded everyone that documentaries require content. Inside the cave, the passage widened into a tunnel. A long one, far longer than we expected. Smooth stone walls, occasional chambers branching off into darkness, and most surprising of all, sections of the tunnel appeared almost shaped, not carved with tools exactly, but worn, smoothed, and widened in ways that suggested long-term use. Not by water, but by movement, repeated movement, for a very long time. According to believers in the underground Neanderthal cities theory, this is precisely what we should expect to find. They claim that beneath mountains and forests across the planet lies a hidden network of tunnels, a subterranean world connecting vast underground chambers, places where an ancient population might live, unseen by the surface world, and where entire communities could survive for thousands of years, protected from climate change, protected from predators, and perhaps protected from us. But if such cities exist, why has no one found them? Conspiracy theorists offer a simple explanation. They say we have found them, or at least glimpsed them, in strange cave systems, in unexplained tunnel formations, in stories told by miners, spelunkers, and explorers who swear they discovered something unusual, only to have their reports quietly dismissed. And then there are the sightings. Because if underground Neanderthal civilizations exist, someone would occasionally need to travel between the surface and the hidden world below. According to the theory, that job belongs to Bigfoot, surface scouts, messengers between underground cities, travelers moving silently through forests, lakes, and mountain valleys like this one, watching, observing, and occasionally leaving behind footprints that spark debates across the internet. On the third evening of filming, something unusual happened near the lake. Our drone operator had launched a camera to capture sunset footage over the water. At first, the video showed nothing unusual. Trees, reflections, clouds glowing gold in the fading light. But as the drone passed over the far shoreline, something moved. A tall shape emerging briefly from the forest, standing upright, watching the drone, then stepping quietly back into the trees. When we reviewed the footage later, the crew watched in silence. Finally, someone said what everyone else was thinking. That was probably just a bear, which would have been comforting. If bears normally stood 8 feet tall and walked away on 2 legs. Of course, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And one blurry drone video does not prove the existence of underground Neanderthal civilizations. But sometimes, it raises questions. Questions about what might be hidden beneath landscapes that appear perfectly ordinary. Because beneath lakes like this one, beneath forests that stretch for hundreds of miles, beneath mountains older than civilization itself, there may exist an entire world we have barely begun to understand. A hidden network of tunnels, ancient chambers, and perhaps underground cities built by a forgotten branch of humanity, with help from somewhere else. In the next segment, our team ventures deeper underground, where the tunnels grow larger, the carvings grow stranger, and one member of the crew discovers that the echo of footsteps in a cave can sometimes sound disturbingly like footsteps that do not belong to you. In the remote wilderness, there are places where the landscape appears to open its mouth. Gigantic cave entrances carved into ancient stone, dark passages disappearing into the mountain itself, natural formations, according to geology. But to some observers, they look less like accidents of nature, and more like doorways into a world below. Across the planet, explorers have documented enormous cave systems beneath mountain ranges, labyrinths stretching for miles, sometimes even hundreds of miles, entire underground rivers, vast caverns capable of holding skyscrapers, subterranean landscapes so large that early explorers described them with a mix of awe and mild existential panic. But according to one controversial theory, these caves are not simply empty geological curiosities. They are infrastructure, part of a hidden underground network, a network that may have been built, or at least expanded, by a civilization that vanished from the surface thousands of years ago. The Neanderthals. Officially, Neanderthals disappeared roughly 40,000 years ago. Their bones remain in caves across Europe and Asia. Their DNA lives quietly inside many modern humans. But beyond that, the story is supposed to end. Except, some researchers believe the evidence suggests something else entirely. Instead of dying out, Neanderthals may have retreated, choosing a different strategy for survival, a strategy that required abandoning the surface world altogether and moving underground. When our documentary crew first arrived in this valley, we thought we were looking at a scenic geological feature, a beautiful canyon, towering cliffs, a peaceful river winding across the valley floor, and one very large cave entrance sitting quietly at the base of the mountains. The kind of place tourists might visit, the kind of place park rangers might warn you about, the kind of place our sound engineer, Carl, immediately refused to enter. Carl has strong feelings about caves, especially caves that look large enough to swallow a city. But curiosity is a powerful force. And after several minutes of professional documentary discussion, and a slightly longer discussion about who would go first, our crew stepped toward the entrance. The cave mouth rose above us like a cathedral door. Cold air drifted out of the darkness, and somewhere deep inside the mountain, we could hear the distant sound of water, or possibly wind, or possibly something that our cameraman later described as definitely footsteps, which we have chosen to categorize, for now, as wind. Inside the cave, the tunnel widened quickly, far larger than expected. The ceiling rose high overhead, and the floor was strangely level, almost like a road. Over thousands of years, natural caves tend to collapse, twist, and erode unpredictably. But sections of this tunnel appeared consistent, symmetrical, wide enough for large groups to travel through. Which brings us back to the central question of this investigation. What if these tunnels were not just caves? What if they were passageways? According to believers in the underground Neanderthal cities theory, these giant entrances are merely surface access points, gateways leading down into a vast subterranean network, a hidden world of chambers, tunnels, and underground settlements. Cities where Neanderthal populations might have survived the Ice Age, and every age since, protected beneath the mountains, invisible to the surface world, and possibly still connected to each other through an immense underground infrastructure. Some conspiracy theorists go even further. They claim the tunnels were not carved by Neanderthals alone. They believe the original construction may have involved extraterrestrial assistance. According to this idea, ancient visitors from elsewhere in the cosmos encountered Neanderthals thousands of years ago. Recognizing their physical strength and adaptability, they helped them create a hidden civilization beneath the earth, a sanctuary away from the competition with Homo sapiens, an underground refuge, an experiment in long-term survival. And if such a world exists beneath our feet, someone would need to move between those hidden cities, someone capable of navigating both underground tunnels and the forests above. Which brings us back, once again, to Bigfoot, because according to the theory, Bigfoot are not wild animals. They are couriers, travelers between underground settlements, surface scouts monitoring the world above, large enough to survive the wilderness, quiet enough to remain unseen, and intelligent enough to avoid documentary crews carrying thermal cameras. Most of the time. On the fourth day of filming in this valley, our team placed motion cameras near the cave entrance, mostly out of curiosity, partly because our producer enjoys unexplained footage, and slightly because Carl refuses to walk back to the cave after sunset. The cameras recorded several hours of normal activity. Wind, shadows, a passing deer. But just before midnight, One camera captured something unusual. A large shape moving along the cliff edge above the cave. Tall, broad, walking upright. The figure paused briefly, looked toward the cave entrance, and then disappeared into the darkness beyond the ridge. Of course, skeptics might suggest a variety of explanations. A bear, a trick of the light, a tall hiker with extremely questionable fashion choices. But the possibility remains that the creature we captured on film may have been something else entirely. A traveler moving between worlds, between the forests above and the hidden tunnels below. Because if the theory of the underground Neanderthal cities is true, then beneath mountains like these, there may exist a civilization older than recorded history. A hidden population living quietly beneath the surface, watching, waiting, and occasionally sending scouts to the world above. Scouts we may know by another name. In the next segment, our team ventures deeper into the cave system itself, where strange markings appear on the tunnel walls. The air grows warmer for reasons no one can quite explain, and our producer begins to suspect that the underground network beneath these mountains may be far larger than anyone imagined. In the remote wilderness, there are landscapes that seem almost too grand to be real. Towering cliffs rise like ancient fortresses. Waterfalls plunge from impossible heights, disappearing into mist before they ever touch the valley floor. Rivers twist through the canyon like silver threads, carving their way through stone older than civilization itself. Places like this inspire awe. They inspire exploration. And according to some researchers, they may also hide the entrances to something extraordinary. Because across the world, geologists have documented a peculiar phenomenon. Entire rivers that simply vanish. Water flowing across the land, suddenly disappearing into deep cracks, sinkholes, or subterranean tunnels. These are known as losing rivers. Natural features where surface water plunges underground, sometimes traveling miles beneath the earth before emerging again. But conspiracy theorists believe these underground waterways may serve another purpose. They believe they are transport routes, part of a hidden subterranean world stretching beneath mountains like these. A world where entire civilizations might move unseen, following underground rivers through colossal cave systems. During the filming of this documentary, our crew followed one such river deep into this canyon. The water flowed calmly across the valley floor, winding its way through grass and stone. Then, quite suddenly, it disappeared. Not into a lake, not into a marsh, but into a vast fissure in the rock. A dark opening large enough to swallow the entire river. The water plunged downward into the mountain, vanishing into a tunnel far below. Our camera crew stared into the darkness. Our producer nodded thoughtfully, and Carl from sound engineering quietly announced that this was an excellent place to turn around. But curiosity, once again, prevailed. With ropes secured and cameras ready, our team descended toward the opening. The deeper we went, the cooler the air became. Mist from the waterfalls drifted through the canyon walls, and the sound of rushing water echoed from somewhere deep beneath our feet. It was here, among the cliffs and hidden rivers, that we began to consider the possibility that this landscape might be part of something much larger. A network. According to the underground Neanderthal cities theory, these massive canyon systems serve as natural camouflage for entrances into the subterranean world. Cave systems hidden behind waterfalls. Tunnels concealed within cliff faces. Passageways masked by rivers plunging underground. all leading into an immense labyrinth beneath the earth. A labyrinth that may connect distant mountain ranges, forests, and valleys across entire continents. Some believers argue that such an enormous underground network could not have formed entirely by chance. Yes, caves exist naturally. But tunnels hundreds of miles long, wide enough for entire populations to travel through, suggest something else may have been involved. Something with knowledge of engineering far beyond prehistoric tools. Which brings us, once again, to the alien hypothesis. According to this theory, ancient extraterrestrial visitors may have helped expand natural cave systems into something far larger, using advanced technology to widen tunnels, reinforce underground chambers, and create a hidden network capable of sustaining an entire civilization beneath the surface. Why they would do this remains a mystery. Perhaps it was an experiment. Perhaps it was a refuge. Or perhaps they simply preferred the Neanderthals, which, depending on your perspective, may say more about humanity than we would like. And if such underground cities exist, someone would need to move between them, traveling from one hidden settlement to another, crossing mountain ranges, following rivers, tunnels, and canyon systems like these. According to believers, those travelers are known to the surface world as Bigfoot. Late on the 5th night of filming in this canyon, our crew placed motion sensors near the river fissure. Mostly out of scientific curiosity, partly because we were running out of batteries for the drone, and slightly because our cameraman claimed he had heard something moving along the cliff above camp. The sensors recorded several hours of normal wilderness sounds: wind, water, a few distant birds. But shortly after midnight, one sensor triggered, then another, and another. 3 separate sensors, positioned along the canyon rim, activated within 30 seconds, as though something large, and moving quietly, had walked along the cliff edge, traveling in the direction of the river's disappearing tunnel. When the crew checked the sensors the next morning, the ground near one of them showed a faint impression in the soil. A footprint, large, human-like, and very much not made by Carl. Of course, skeptics remind us that nature often creates strange coincidences. Large animals walk through forests. Footprints appear in mud. Sensors malfunction. And sometimes documentary crews simply become a little too enthusiastic about mysteries. But one question remains. If underground Neanderthal cities truly exist, if hidden tunnels connect the mountains beneath our feet, if ancient civilizations still move through those shadowed corridors, then perhaps valleys like this are not empty wilderness at all. Perhaps they are crossroads, places where the hidden world below briefly touches the surface, and where the scouts, the watchers, may occasionally pass through. In the final segment of our investigation, our team attempts the most ambitious exploration yet, a descent into one of the deepest cave passages discovered during this expedition, where strange markings appear on the stone. The air grows warmer the deeper we travel, and one member of the crew begins to suspect that someone else may already be living far below these mountains. From high above, the wilderness appears peaceful. Endless forests glowing with autumn color. Rivers winding quietly through valleys carved by glaciers long before recorded history. Mountains standing watch over a landscape that seems untouched by the modern world. Places like this give us the comforting illusion that we understand our planet, that we have explored it, mapped it, catalogued every corner. But sometimes, The most mysterious worlds are not the distant ones beyond the stars. Sometimes, they are the ones beneath our feet. Throughout this investigation, our team has followed a strange trail of clues. Gigantic cave entrances hidden in remote valleys. Underground rivers vanishing into tunnels beneath the mountains. Footprints appearing where no one should have been walking. And motion sensors that seem oddly enthusiastic about triggering themselves after midnight. Each piece of evidence on its own might be dismissed. A coincidence. A trick of the light. Or, according to Carl from Sound Engineering, a very convincing reason to film documentaries about gardening instead. But taken together, the questions become harder to ignore. Because the theory of the underground Neanderthal cities suggests something extraordinary. It suggests that tens of thousands of years ago, Neanderthals did not disappear. They adapted. Faced with climate change, competition with Homo sapiens, and an increasingly hostile surface world, they chose a different path. They moved underground, into the immense cave systems that lie beneath mountain ranges across the planet. There, according to the theory, they built hidden settlements, subterranean cities, communities sustained by underground rivers, geothermal warmth, and carefully managed ecosystems. Over thousands of years, these hidden populations may have evolved further, developing cultures, technologies, and perhaps alliances that remain completely invisible to the surface world, including, some believe, help from extraterrestrial visitors. According to this hypothesis, ancient alien explorers may have recognized something unique about Neanderthals: their strength, their resilience, their ability to survive in extreme environments. Instead of allowing them to vanish from Earth, the visitors may have helped them construct an underground sanctuary, a hidden civilization that could endure for millennia, out of sight, out of history, and entirely outside the story we tell ourselves about human evolution. But if such underground cities exist, they would not be completely isolated. They would still need to monitor the world above, to watch, to observe, to understand the strange species that eventually took over the surface. Which brings us, one final time, to Bigfoot. According to believers in the theory, Bigfoot are not merely mysterious animals roaming the forests. They are envoys, surface scouts traveling between underground settlements, messengers moving quietly through the wilderness, watching human civilization from a distance, studying it, avoiding it, and occasionally being photographed in ways that would frustrate professional wildlife photographers everywhere. On the final evening of filming for this documentary, our crew returned to the high ridge overlooking this valley. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains. Autumn forests glowed in shades of gold and crimson. Mist drifted slowly through the valleys below. For a long moment, the wilderness was completely silent. Then, just as the last light faded, our cameraman noticed something along the far ridgeline. A tall figure moving slowly between the trees, walking upright, pausing occasionally, as though watching the valley below. The camera zoomed in. The image blurred slightly in the evening haze, and just as quickly as it appeared, the figure disappeared into the forest. Carl suggested it was probably a moose, which would have been reassuring. If moose normally stood upright and walked thoughtfully along mountain ridges. Of course, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and one mysterious figure in a distant forest does not prove the existence of underground civilizations. But mysteries often begin this way, with questions, with small clues, with landscapes that seem ordinary, until you begin to wonder what might lie beneath them. Because if the theory of the underground Neanderthal cities is true, then somewhere below mountains like these, beneath the forests, rivers, and valleys of our world, an ancient civilization may still exist. Quiet, hidden, watching the surface world from the shadows of a forgotten chapter of human history, and every once in a while, sending a scout to walk the forests above. For now, the mystery remains unsolved, but the wilderness still holds many secrets, and somewhere beneath these mountains, the tunnels may still stretch on, waiting for someone curious enough to keep asking questions, and brave enough to follow the river into the darkness below.